we don't necessarily want to be like, let's talk about the things that people are talking about, you know, because I think that personally we're all going through some shit, right? And I think there's different ways that we can be looking at it rather than very linear. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was this kind of this conversation, and I was saying, I'm not going to discuss it in public. I'm not going to do it. But then
talking about Beyonce.
The Black is King, and like that.
I mean, but here's the thing, like literally when I say I'm tired of the hashtag discourse, I'm saying from Black is King to WAP to Kamala to like all of it, like I'm just like in my group chats because I just, and I've said before, like it's hard because I don't feel like social media especially is like a great place for dialogue. I think it's a great place for monologuing. I think it's a good place for certain types of organization. I think it's a great place for certain types of information sharing, but it's not the place for nuance. At least I think you have to be skilled in certain ways to be able to approach it. But it's not ready made for nuance, right? And so,
Right.
that can be really exhausting because it can feel, I think, at times like it can feel kind of isolating, right? Like especially if my social media platforms look very different because they're composed of different people from different parts of my life. And so I think it can feel quite isolating sometimes when you're like on one place and it's just certain kind of repetitive reactions and you're like, I mostly agree, but also like here's where I don't. And like, but like you can't say that, right? A like is just a like. It doesn't give you space to say like I'm liking this part of your sentence and not that one. And then or to say like, okay, in context, I agree with this, or like in principle, I agree with this, but I don't think the example you're using is the one for you, sis. Like, let's have a different example, perhaps, that does the work better for you here. And so I think that is, you know, over the last, I don't know, what is pandemic time? Whenever, over the last 2-3 weeks, whatever, that has been like the overwhelming feeling of like, is too much, and then you kind of like whisper to the people in whatever group chats you are that feel safe or that you can leave things unspoken, you can, that has that context or has that nuance, and figuring out how you want to engage. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, apropos like earlier conversations we've had, all of these things have centered on Black women in particular ways that makes it messier because you have sincere critiques and conversations and dialogues and like sincerity. And then you have, because anytime you have Black women, you're going to also have misogyny, you're going to have racism, you're going to have all of these other things. And so it makes it messy because you're trying to wade through it. And I think there's times where because of that, one of the other overwhelming feelings is like, damn, y'all really hate Black women. Like, so that's about where I'm at with all that.
So, okay, there's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot. But first we get there because I think we are all in some ways wanting to have a conversation about that. And at least I feel called to be like, look, this is real. And I've been skirting around it myself as well, trying to figure that out. But let me kind of give a little introduction before we get into it, because I feel like it's there, right? And we're gonna go. So I am DW, and this is.
Hi, I'm Kinga.
And we are
Counterculture educator.
Right.
We help creative leaders turn around the culture of their communities one authentic relationship at a time through community engagement, artistic expression, self-care, and play. And today we are joined with one of our dope homies that I've known for such a long time, since we were kids. And I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Amira Rose Davis, Dr. Amira Rose Davis is, I guess, my official title, but you can call me Amira. Um, and I am assistant professor of history and African American studies at Penn State University. I'm also the co-host of the feminist sports podcast, Burn It All Down. And that is me.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for joining us.
yeah, you got it.
Who left? Samari. Who walked outside? Let me say that again. Hi. Hey, y'all. My name is Dr. Amira Rose Davis. I'm an assistant professor of history and African American studies at Penn State University. I'm also the co-host of the feminist sports podcast, Burn It All Down. And I specialize in looking at the intersection of race, sports, gender, and politics. And generally overall specialize in Black women's history, mostly in the 20th and 21st centuries. But I can stretch a little bit into the 19th century. I don't like it there, but I can do it. And that's a little bit about me.
Word. I want to also say, like, my pronouns are they, them.
Oh, yes. Mine are she, they.
She, her, hers.
Okay. Awesome. So the reason we already started to get into it before we even introduced ourselves, because I can feel it. I can feel it. And then as soon as I started talking to you, I was like, Amira gets it. Amira gets it. You know, and the so I'm just gonna go into like the commentary of, well, actually, let me just ask you, let me check in. Something brought you joy this week?
Yeah, that's a good question. What is a week even? It's really that, like, honestly, y'all, is so my pandemic purchase was a Peloton, and I am, let's say, obsessed. And so it's really hard. On my podcast, at the end of every Burn It All Down, we do a What's Good section, and the running joke that we've had for 2.5 months now is that I like struggle to find a What's Good that is not Peloton related. But I lean into it because, I mean, I talk to my students about being fans of problematic things, and I actually am really impressed with some of the stuff that Peloton's doing. So anyways, all of that to say that that this week Peloton had a Prince ride that was just so much fun. And it was super purple, and it was a good time, and I PR'd, so I beat my previous output at that distance, and you know, got my life to Purple Rain on a bike, and you know, burned like 500 calories in half an hour, living my best life. So that was like a really great. Personal was good. Professionally, what's good? I have a piece out this week in Washington Post on the history of Black college athletes in revolt. And I just did a live stream with NPR and WBUR on the myths of meritocracy in race and sports. And that was such a fun event. And unfortunately, one of the last events from Only a Game, which is run for 27 years on NPR and is now ending. But it was a great way to send off the show. And so those were moments of light, to be in conversation with dope people, to be here with y'all, and then personally to kind of find my version of self-care and push myself to new levels in that, and also Prince. So.
Something brought you joy this week, Kinga?
Let's see. My thing, I think, is just being brought back to my body. I had a flare-up with an injury, and so I was in a lot of pain, and the pain subsiding brought me a lot of joy. And also just being brought back into what it is that my body needs so that I don't have that pain flare-up anymore. That brought me a lot of joy as well. What about you?
I just spilled a lot of water on me. So, but I'm gonna sit here because, you know, it's hot. So whatever. Something that brought me joy this week. It was interesting week, very emotionally filled. I was in circle process. So for those who may not know what that is, but I was just in process with like some extraordinary people about building our stories and like hearing our stories and listening. And these processes, people often confuse for a lot of different things, but the process I was in is where we do healing, and we support each other through our stories. And it was very interesting because when you sit, this experience that I was having sitting in circle was just like, it was tough because it's so intergenerational. This one was very intergenerational and filled with elders. And the experience for me was feeling an erasure of my identity, specifically around my gender, and really having to, especially, so this is something that has really been hard for me with Blackness and gender, is that or Blackness and expression, gender expression, any of those things, is how within the culture I've experienced people just erasing whatever it is that I feel like represents myself in a very harmful way without acknowledging my being. If it makes them feel uncomfortable, they don't acknowledge what is happening. And I've experienced that on many levels with my peers, with colleagues, a lot intergenerationally with elders, of being like, I'm too tired to call you by this or that and that and that. And just really wanting to express, I am not for causing people harm, right? And I know that happens intentionally and unintentionally, right? And so how do we move through that and continue to build in a way where we're not continuing that harm? And so when I say to somebody, it would light me up, because I know that if you don't refer to me to my pronouns, that I do feel erased. My identity, it's a deep sense of hurt, right? And so when I say it would light me up if you refer to me as fam or family, rather than sis or brother or whatever that is for you. And that being enough, right? So this is the discussion that we're having of like, why isn't it enough for me to feel joy? And for that to be it. You don't have to get it. It doesn't have to make sense to you, right? So something that brought me joy was coming to a closer understanding with people around that, around what it means, especially intergenerationally, especially with dealing with Blackness in this, for people to, not everybody, but some people really being committed to lifting, what we would say, lifting their own shit off of them. Oh, there's a baby. And I had it.
Hello.
Hi, sweetie.
Say hi.
It's okay.
That's okay. I'm just saying.
Okay, go ahead. Spell your name.
I need to start over again.
You need to start over again?
Yes, it is.
Hi.
Leaary.
Wow.
You make me pizza.
You want me to make you pizza?
Yes. And I.
I will make you pizza in a little bit, or you can try to ask your sister to make you pizza. Or you can have a snack now, and then we can figure out food later.
And after is Ghost and Molly watching TV.
She's watching TV in her room?
No, watching TV.
Okay, knock on the door. I'll text her too and ask her for help, or grab a snack, and then we'll eat some more later.
But the snack is closed.
Oh, then have your brother or your sister open it for you. Solutions all around you. Grab one of them and close my door.
But Molly watching TV.
I will text her. We will figure this out. I want you to put a little bit of energy into solving your own problems, though. And can you please close my door? And hey, listen, don't come back in.
What's it doing?
Sure.
I'm so obsessed with this. This is my new favorite TV show.
Okay, I'll tell Molly to put it on for you. Okay, bye-bye.
Oh my God.
I will call her now. Thank you for your reminder.
Oh my gosh.
Yo, there's such a, but you know
How old is he?
He'll be 4 in 2 weeks. Oh,
you know, there's such a lightness about young people.
Yes.
like when they enter space, I'm like, oh, I've got this shit. And then your son comes, I'm like,
Yeah.
I know.
oh my God,
All my problems.
it just goes away.
Probably not the same for you. But
No, he doesn't. The other one's like, no. But he's a little bit like,
I'm just gonna spell my name.
I like how she's just definitely.
he was like, and hi. I love it.
Spelling his name, which is what we worked on at the beginning of quarantine, and then I gave up. And so that's like his one quarantine skill. I'm done.
I needed that. Yeah.
Sorry, keep going.
So I'm thinking, that was just so much joy.
I know. I
think
needed to bask in that.
Yeah.
You can tell we're ready for kids.
I know, because you're like, it's so joyful. It's like a lot. When you know you're not ready, like you're like, oh no, this. I did call her. I did, and I text her. You couldn't hear me text her, but I did. I got this. I'm doing my part. Can you do your part? Can you go follow up with her? Thank you. Go ahead. And if you, hey, if you can't get the snack drawer open and she's not being cooperative, you can get a popsicle instead, okay? Okay.
Now he's happy. That was a good solution. He's like, okay.
But it's so amazing to watch like your friend's parent.
Mm-hmm.
Like for me at least, it's so amazing to be like, wow, having this whole lifetime of being with you in different journeys in your life, and then being able to watch that moment of such tenderness and goodness, right? Even and you may not, your experience I'm sure is different than mine, but even the amount of patience that it takes to have children, and for you to be like, you know what, I'm gonna need you to be a little bit more solution oriented,
mm-hmm.
and to express those things in such a tender way. It's just really, it's amazing to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's tender the first time. About 2 more times, the tone might shift a little.
That's warranted.
Right.
That's warranted.
Right.
Yeah.
But the initial tenderness is like something that is very foreign to my childhood.
Attentiveness at the same time. Like, you know, giving him all these solutions and actually attending to the fact that instead of just being like, well, we'll wait and then you'll get a snack, you know, there's like so many different ways that we could have gone about it. And I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, thank you.
Pandemic parenting is its own like learning process. Everybody, we're just like, it's a new, patience has been a thing that we've had to all work on, because it's just, it's been months and you're all right there. So yeah, I mean, I think figuring out how to coexist with like everybody's needs and wants and various versions of, I'm extroverted, folks are introverted in this house, just like matching energies. It's all been a thing. And now I saw a tweet last night that was really funny and made me laugh, and I'll talk about it later. But in the tweet, they said quarantine season 1, which I really like. And so that's how I think about it. Now that we're in like, you know, the 3rd season of quarantine, I feel like we are better at certain things. One of which is being a little bit more patient.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I can only imagine like families just living like this all the time back in the day.
Yeah. I know.
Like for your whole life.
Go play outside. Go outside.
There's also another tweet that made me laugh. Tweets make me laugh. That was like parents today, like, well, if our kids can't go to school, like, what are we supposed to do? Just leave them home by themselves? And then it's like 90s parents, and it's the meme, like, definitely what we did. But yeah, no. Anyways, back to business.
So yeah, let's. I want to dig in a little bit, like about because that's something that's been surfacing for me a lot. Just being a Black femme and being in the world of, and especially also being dark skinned too, and then really thinking about the ways, even in my family, like I'm one of 5, and I am the only femme identifying person in my family, right? And so the rest identify as cis men, cis hetero, like cisgender men and hetero men. So, or straight men or whatever, however, but that's how they identify. And also being in a matriarchal family, right? So not having a lot of adult men around. And so how that has played out into our adulthood has been very interesting, and a lot of feelings for me have been associated with that. A lot of feelings of hurt, a lot of feelings of like not being held or seen, right? And just understanding that how we carry, when we're femmes in the world, that the experience of being femme in the world and the experience of being of like maleness or whatever people identify in that sector, in that range, are very different experiences, and we hold the world and the world holds us in a very different way. And that not being acknowledged really in my experience with my family in particular, like my family of origin. So so when we go into this conversation, I'm really interested and intrigued to hear all of your thoughts on this. And also, like when you were talking about debating and being in dialogue with people, and tenderness, right? What does it mean to be gentle? What does it mean to be tender? What does it mean to meet people with a different kind of language that is not steeped in the violence that whiteness brings, or the violence that like the white supremacist language brings? And how do we do that? So I'm kind of bringing that here to say that I want to have this conversation with you. We want to have this conversation with you. And how can we honor what it is that we may need while having this conversation, and maybe shed some light on how people can have conversations about this, being tender and being and offering a gentleness, knowing that we all need that tenderness and that gentleness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that, one of the things that drove me to Black women's history is a lot of some of the stuff that you voiced, which is that feeling of, academically, you have intersectionality as a theory, which has kind of become a popular buzzword too. But within that is this idea of like the double bind, that you're literally laboring under the weight of double oppressions, and the way that manifests is particularly about like intertwining structures that are compressing against you. And I think that for me, it's when I think about Black women, I really engage in conversations around symbol, and I'm really fascinated about the way that Black women are hyper visible and also invisible, how they are, seen and unseen, that they are seemingly always erased, nothing centered on them, and yet they are always invoked to be conduits to all these larger conversations. And it's that duality that was, grounded in my experience, but also in the work that I really was interested in doing. And so I do that through sports. But I think I see it applicable to Black women and femme-identified, non-binary Black folks as well, who are carrying in literally like kind of, I was giving a talk to some of my students who contort their backs, who contort themselves to fit in, slide in all of these other places, and are so used to that weight and are so used to doing those contortions that we end up thinking that that's a natural position. And there's that phrase like the bridge called my back, but like what that actually manifests is this weight and heaviness that can have us, for so many of us, walking completely disoriented and out of position and thinking this is what it's supposed to feel like. And part of the work that I do, both historically and contemporary, with students, in various spaces, is saying what happens if you put your spine back up. And what it takes to do that can manifest in different ways. It can be self-care, it can be empowerment, it can be political engagement. It has a lot of different ways. It can be saying no, it can be opting out, it can be resting. But what does it look like if all of a sudden you straighten your spine and you stop contorting? What does that breath feel like then? Is it easier to breathe? And that first time you take that breath, you realize, I have been breathing like all crunched over. And then you start identifying what are those things that had you in that position in the first place. And to me, that is what I gather and get from Black women's history. And that's why that's my field of study, but it's really applicable. So like I said, I do it through sports. And so Serena Williams is one of the first people that when I'm talking, people are always like, I'm Serena. And I think that she's useful for me in the sense that when I'm talking about those symbolic politics, if you go on Twitter, you go whatever, during a match, what you'll see is a projection, both positive and negative projections onto her play, onto her body. And you'll see a similar thing happen when Beyonce drops new work. In political spheres, you see it a lot of places. And I'm always interested in when does Serena the person stop? When does Beyonce the person stop and the projections begin? And that doesn't mean projections can't be grounded in context or reality or critique or anything like that. But I guess I'm really fascinated in the ways in which Black, femme people especially become like the screen on which all of these other things are projected, while simultaneously being kind of erased or being told they're unimportant. And it's like, well, actually everything is turning on me right now. So I start my book with a kind of Hortense Spiller quote from some of the work that says, it's a quote that's saying, they call me all these things, and if I did not exist, they would have to invent me. And to me, that points to like what a position we hold, and that makes the erasure feel heavier, because it's like you're eliding these experiences and then simultaneously seizing upon them to make all of these other points that seem to only be made on our backs. And so to me, that is what I'm really interested in, and in both like academic and personal level. And certainly when we talk about the last few weeks, that has been
talk about it. Okay, so can I pause? Because we're gonna go. It's been an extraordinary couple of weeks, especially for Black femmes, Black women, Black cis, any femme identifying Black person. I want to say also, can you speak a little bit more about projection? What do you mean by people projecting their stuff? It's just so we can have some clarity around
like an example.
Yeah, an example.
So I'll go back to Serena. If she plays, there's a lot of people who will tweet and use her to get out all of their racism and sexism, to draw cartoons of her with racist caricatures, to describe her play in animalistic terms, to try to discipline her body or speak about her body constantly, her marital choices, etc.
Wow.
And then what I mean by projection on the other side is there's a lot of people who see her as a manifestation of Black girl magic, who feel empowered by her play, by her winning, who might not necessarily engage in tennis or the sport, but if they see Serena, they're retweeting and say Black girl magic, or we're winning, or whatever. And they also seize upon some of what's directed towards her as an example of their condition as well. And so what I mean by projection is what happens is that she could be playing, and the only information people could have is that they see her on a court. And all of these things will continue to be thrown and layered on top of that. And so part of it for me is, of course, on the, what I would consider negative side. what does it mean that she becomes like a vessel for policing the boundaries of the sport, or the right way tennis should be played, or a conversation about her body, and that it's not, you know, heteronormative, like that it's not contained or traditionally beautiful, et cetera, et cetera. And then yet when she falls in love and gets married, it becomes a larger conversation about interracial relationships. And then, you know, what does it look like if, when she has at the US Open last year, altercation with the referee, and it became, you know, there's racist cartoons with her throwing a fit. It became all this stuff. But then on the other hand, it also became a moment for people to say, this is, in the words of Brittany Cooper, eloquent rage, and this is her finally bucking the system, and this, that, and the other. And in that projection, though, it also flattened the context. So like, she wasn't doing anything, she wasn't coaching. No, there was coaching, right? So like, we lose the space to talk about the actual humanity of it, right? But sometimes you lose your cool. And when I talk about nuance, when I talk about that, I think for me, it's like, who can lose their cool? How is that responded to? But what it isn't for me is saying, oh, she was not angry, because they don't want to feed into a idea of an angry Black woman. Like, no, in the moment she was damn angry. And so when I'm talking about projections, I'm talking about when people become spaces for larger feelings, and useful examples to point to of personal feelings or larger kind of patterns. And oftentimes they're very useful examples. And then sometimes it's like, does this add to the dialogue in the way that you're intending it to? So for example, what does a conversation about diasporic Blackness look like? And are the ways in which people are employing Black is King within that dialogue doing the work of actually having this dialogue? So does there need to be a conversation, right, about ideas about Africa and Black Americans' participation in colonization and in empire? And absolutely. Is this example, when people are pointing to Beyonce and Black is King, doing that same work? And oftentimes it's a mixed answer. It's doing some of the work, but not all. But flattening a conversation, using it as a projection to say, this is the example of cultural appropriation, or this is the example of like the height of all colorism. Well, like, in what ways is it doing that? And in what ways is that not actually the situation, right? Like, does it look different if we ground it in the details? And that is, to me, that space between where a person, an individual stops, and then the larger structures or ideas or things take hold. And so when I'm talking about projection, I'm talking about that part of the conversation that may be tied to parts of the individual situation at play or whatever, but ends up ballooning to encompass so much more.
So much. I'm like, it's hefty. It's hefty for me, because I've been asked about my opinion on Black is King specifically. And King and I have this ongoing dialogue about Beyonce. Mm-hmm. And one of my biggest things is that I, at one point, was like, I'm not going to be the person who publicly does any type of conversation that can be conceived as criticism towards any Black femme in public at all, but I will have that conversation with my people. Because once I do that for anybody else who is outside of the diaspora in that way, then they'll take that, and we talk about projections, they project that over here. Well, you said, and this, and that makes me right, and my thought process. And so when we talk about violent nature of like being trained in that violence, then we are projecting, we project that violence, and that looks like reasoning when we respond, of really like, it gives you a reasonable argument per se. So I didn't want any of my critiques to be used as ammunition per se, for lack of a better word, ammunition to somebody else's argument. You know?
That is such a long, like Black women particularly, and Black femme identifying people in particularly, have long done the work of protection, meaning saying things quietly, holding their tongues, figuring out, at least you give any of these other systems of power, particularly around cishet Black men, right? Any power at all, whether that is underreporting sexual assault, whether that is underreporting domestic violence, whether it's downplaying it, whether it's underreporting or not engaging with homophobia in certain ways, right? Because even they'll go back to the top where you said, you know, one of the things you've experienced within Blackness in communities in your family of origin is around kind of lack of engagement or respect, or, you know, space for your gender expression. I even felt that part of me like immediately say, oh, I want to do the caveat that like, it's not just Blackness, and we know homophobia is in all communities and how it manifests, whatever, right? Because so often, right, you're guarded against exterior conversations that want, like we saw in California around Prop 8, that want to say, oh, like Black homophobia is like rampant, and it is like the reason why this proposition failed, or it's the reason for this, it's the reason for that. And you're guarding against it because you're saying, well, no, like we just numerically don't have the ability to be the barrier to this, right? And this feeling of saying like, no, the Black community is not any more inherently homophobic than any other community. But sometimes what happens when you're saying that to protect against those exterior comments or way it would be wielded as a weapon is it flattens the opportunity to have those interior discussions about harm, to have those interior discussions about like, oh, well, how is it manifesting, right? And so it's one thing to say, there's a long history of engagement with Black folks in terms of a range of gender expressions, in terms of a range of sexualities. There's a long history of engagement with folks in Black institutions, in this and that, whatever. And it's something else to say, why is Bayard Rustin pushed to the back of civil rights history, right? Why don't we remember Marsha Johnson in terms of Stonewall? Why, like, there's space to do that. There's space to say, yeah, like Black gay folks have always been up in the Black church, and to say, why is it fine with, you know, them playing your organ and directing your choir and doing this, but not to confront the way that your kind of religion theology like is causing harm? And I think that is sometimes the tension, is you always have this kind of eye, and you're like, all right, how does me voicing this be a tool that could be used back against us, right? But then it cuts off very real discussions that need to happen. And I think that's kind of what I was pointing to around like the limits of social media for like dialogue, because like what we're doing now and what so much of this is like exactly that, like a dialogue where a dialogue is not conditioned on agreement. It's actually a space for exchange. It's not a debate. It's not where we're trying to one up each other, but it's literally something that you can actually say, let me think about that. Growth doesn't happen on the spot. Growth doesn't happen 140 characters on the spot when you're called out or called in, whatever. But it's a lot easier also to call somebody gently in and say, hey, this is how this perpetuated harm, or I would like to push this further, or I'm wondering about this, or here's other things I'm thinking about, or even working through something, because that's another big thing. A lot of times there's a lot of times there's also these ideas that you have fully formed opinions and everything and aren't working through it in and of it yourself, especially when people know or think that you engage on certain topics or certain things. And I think that one of the things that happens is if you don't have the space to sit through and process your multiple evolving feelings, then you couldn't even walk somebody through your evolution. You couldn't talk about what helped you get to it and why. And I think those are the conversations that are really what transformation looks like, because so much of that work happens behind the scenes. It's a book that somebody gives you to read. It's a conversation with somebody that changes your outlook. It's acclamation of many of those things. And it's a year, it's a month, it's a day later, a week later, you know, hell, it could be 5 years later. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get this in a different way, and I've changed, I've grown, and this is how that has changed my politics or my consumption patterns or all of these things. And that includes having grace with yourself. And I think that that's the other thing, is that there's times where that, especially if you have an ethics of empathy, that you are constantly worried about the protection of others.
Oh no. Amira, can you hear us?
I can. You said, oh no, at the same time.
Yeah.
Is it back?
The
You're
protection
back.
of others. Yeah, you're saying.
Yeah. So you're constantly dealing with the protection of others so much that you're starving yourself. And what happens if you're not giving yourself space to even check in and say, hey, hold on, what do I actually think about that? And I think like Black is King is a great example. It's very different to watch that and figure out what is my own reaction, emotion, relationship to this before I hear everybody else's, before I feel what am I supposed to do, before I am even in the place to say, like, I think there's sometimes what we try on critiques before even knowing what it really means to us. And it could be that you watch it and have all those same critiques. It could be that you watch it and have different ones. It could be that you watch it and you're feeling emotions, and then later you're unpacking critiques and you see it differently. But if you don't give yourself the chance to like have your own process from the jump, then sometimes what happens is you're constantly muting your actual feelings, because all you have is those projections of others or how other people are reacting to something. And I think it just does a disservice, because then it's hard, right? And then I think it becomes hard to even know yourself. What do you like and why? Or what was meaningful and why? And if that was meaningful, even if this wasn't the space for it, maybe that gives you a pathway to another element of self-care or engagement or learning or whatnot. And maybe it sets you on a path where you're like, I want to learn more about this. Let me follow up on this. Who can I talk to? Who can I read? What voices do I need to know about? And I think that to me is one of the things that happens sometimes when we're quick to kind of engage, but not quick to listen and have a dialogue.
A word on today.
I know, I'm just like,
but
you just said it all.
All of it. But I want to give you space, Kinga, because I know there's a lot. We've had a lot of discussion about a lot of things, especially when we're talking about projections, especially around Beyonce, especially around, and also like, I want to talk a lot about social media and the projections that even, you know, Kinga has expressed to me in being in conversation with people and saying, but I didn't say that. I welcomed a conversation about this, and then how people were like, went all the way there when you open with the spirit of inquiry, and you're like, well, what does this mean? Rather than saying, well, this is this and that is that. But, you know, how even our feelings, right? There's times where we've expressed our feelings online in a way where it's just like, well, this feeling is coming up for me. Mm-hmm. And people have taken that as a point of attack of, you shouldn't even feel that way. Or like, are you saying your feelings, are like, you know, I'm thinking of a specific instance where I expressed my feelings on an issue of whiteness, and someone was like, well, are you saying that this person was doing this, as if I was attacking the person?
Like assume that this person thought this or was doing that, you know, rather than just being like, well, I just felt that way in that moment. That was my feeling. That was my reaction. you
And
know?
right. And then knowing like, well, I can't have feelings all of a sudden. I can't be in space. And then when we talk about the layer of Black feminists and how it's just like, whoa, so now it makes it different when this is a white presenting person who's saying that to me. And it's like, I don't even know if you're aware of the layers that your comment alone brings. And also,
Right.
that's not something I necessarily want to address with you or address in general. And you don't deserve that kind of time from me. Right.
Yeah.
But just like all of the things that happen with that. But I want to give you space.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I just think for me, it comes down to like how difficult it actually ends up becoming to function in these kind of circumstances.